The conflict is complicated, and I think this illustrates the enduring complexity of current war. For example, there's about 10 different warring parties. In Iraq, you've got ISIS fighting the Kurdish Peshmerga, the US-led coalition, the Iraqi security forces, and also the Shia militias, many of which are actively supported by Iran. The conflict in Syria has slightly different dynamics. You've got the Assad government. It's being fought by ISIS. It's also being fought by a coalition of insurgents led by Jabhat al-Nusra, who is the Al-Qaeda affiliate. It's also being fought by ISIS, and it's also being fought by a coalition of more moderate Syria opposition groups who appear to have benefited recently from active support from Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Jordan, and possibly some Gulf states. So what is the positive news? I've got 3 points here. Well, the first positive news is that Lebanon, Turkey and Jordan, the frontline states, have not been overwhelmed by the massive influx of refugees, and we have the international community and its major humanitarian organisations to thank for that. But what is very important is those refugee camps don't become breeding grounds for radicalisation. The second piece of good news is that ISIS has been pushed back. When the Pentagon says that it's been pushed back from about 25% of the territory it controlled in its high water mark, I accept that assessment. And we also saw the town of Kobani held by Syrian Kurds with support from air, and we've seen a certain amount of pushing back by the Syrian Kurds. The third piece of good news was the US Special Operations Forces raid in May. That suggested the coalition now has built up a sufficiently granular intelligence picture that it could conduct this extremely high-risk operation, and it's to be hoped that the raid yielded a haul of exploitable intelligence. But I'm afraid there's some negative trends. The first negative trend is the borders are not sealed. Certainly the border with Turkey is not sealed, and there's evidence of other porosity as well, the border with Jordan and indeed other parts of the region. The second thing is both ISIS and other Sunni insurgents are still active behind the front line in and around Baghdad and the Sunni areas there. Indeed, they keep running suicide bombs into Baghdad. 35 Iraqi civilians killed at the weekend. The next point is that the Iraqi government security forces still have very limited capability, and they're being built up really quite slowly. Against that, of course, the government has become more dependent on the Shia militias, many of whom have a Shia agenda as well as, if you like, an Iraqi nationalist agenda. It's also not clear in the war if either the Shia militias or the Peshmergas are willing to take much risk outside the areas they continue their core areas. Whether Shia militia soldiers are going to be prepared to lay their lives on the line to clear predominantly Sunni areas is not clear. The next point is, although ISIS in Iraq has been on the strategic defensive, it's been a very active defence, and it's often achieved tactical overmatch against Iraqi government forces. And we saw this in Ramadi, where a tactical success had operational, strategic and political effects. And the fall of Ramadi plays into ISIS's strategy. By establishing the caliphate in being with its apparatus of a state, it's not only seized the jihadist narrative from Al-Qaeda, it's also inspired its followers globally. And by defending the boundaries of the caliphate and successfully mounting attacks both in Iraq and Syria, it provides material to be rapidly exploited by its modern propaganda operation. So it sustains and grows its support base even when it's losing territory in Iraq. And the propaganda operation, of course, inspires recruits to travel to the caliphate or violent extremists to conduct attacks on ISIS' behalf in their own countries. And at the Shangri-La Dialogue earlier this year, we learned that, for example, 700 people from Malaysia have travelled to the caliphate, sufficient for ISIS to form a Malaysian language battalion. And these facts on the ground have also inspired other violent extremists to attempt to construct outposts of the caliphate. We've seen this with Boko Haram and in Libya. Now, the anti-ISIS coalition members have only finite intelligence and surveillance resources, be those satellites, drones, or indeed human intelligence teams. And in addition, they have other requirements for those. For example, the US is still actively collecting intelligence in Afghanistan. And the Saudi-led coalition, of course, is extremely concerned with the conflict in Yemen. So these counterattacks by ISIS and the actions elsewhere by those inspired by ISIS actually reduce the ability of the anti-ISIS coalition to contain ISIS. And there's some inconvenient truths, for example, mathematics. If the number of new fighters joining ISIS frontline forces is equal to or greater than those being killed in combat, the caliphate stands a good chance of being able to endure for some time. So my assessment is this war is going to continue for some time.